Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful forces in any young person's life, their family. We're going to see how it can be a shield against delinquency, but also how, in some of the most tragic cases, it can become the very thing that creates it. It's a story it's hard to even wrap your head around. In Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, two teenage brothers methodically killed 5 members of their own family. And this wasn't some sudden explosion of rage. No, it was a plot they'd been cooking up for over a year. The Bever case, as extreme as it is, really forces you to ask the question, what on earth happens inside a home that leads to such a complete and horrifying breakdown? That's the mystery we're really digging into today. To understand how things can go so wrong, we first have to appreciate just how influential the family unit really is. I mean, it's the first place we learn everything. Our values, our attitudes, the stuff that guides us for the rest of our lives, for better or for worse. And you know what? The research on this is crystal clear. Study after study shows that a positive family life is like a powerful shield. Good parenting, strong emotional bonds, these things can protect kids from all sorts of negative influences, even if they live in the toughest neighborhoods. That feeling of warmth and support, it really does build a foundation for a healthy life.
But here's the thing, that foundation is being built on some seriously shifting ground. The whole structure of the American family has changed so dramatically over the last 50 years, and these changes have brought a whole new set of stresses and challenges for parents and kids alike.
One of the biggest stressors on families today is economic. More than 1 in 5 kids in the U.S. lives in poverty. That's over 15 million children. And this isn't just a number, you know? It represents incredible pressure on families who are struggling with basics like housing, healthcare, and just putting food on the table.
And the structural shift has been just as dramatic. I mean, look at this. Back in the 1960s, almost 3/4 of all kids lived with 2 married parents. Fast forward to today, and that number's dropped to about half. With divorce and remarriage being much more common, a lot of kids now go through some major changes in their family structure while they're growing up.
And this has led to something researchers call fragile families, basically unmarried couples raising kids together. And while these parents often start out with the best of intentions, these relationships just tend to be less stable over time. And that instability can really put a child's access to financial and social support at risk, which just adds another layer of stress.
Okay, so we've seen the big societal shifts. Now, let's zoom in a little closer and look at the specific dynamics inside a family that research tells us are linked to delinquency.
You know, it's really easy to just blame divorce. And sure, it can be incredibly tough on a kid. But staying together for the kids isn't always the magic bullet. Research actually shows that living in a home that's just filled with constant fighting can be just as damaging to a child as a family breaking up. At the end of the day, it's the emotional climate that matters most, not just who's living under the same roof. So, on the flip side, what does work? Well, there's this concept called parental efficacy. It's not about being super strict or a total pushover. It's about finding that sweet spot, creating a supportive, structured home where kids feel like they belong, but are also taught how to manage their own behavior. It's that balance that turns out to be a really powerful defense against delinquency.
And when that efficacy is missing, you start to see these really common, really damaging patterns pop up. Wildly inconsistent discipline. It just creates chaos and confusion. Poor supervision that leaves kids totally vulnerable. Hostile detachment where a parent just emotionally checks out. That is so incredibly damaging. And then you have something called resource dilution, where in really big families, parents are just spread too thin to give every child the attention they truly need.
All of these issues create risk, but they can all lead down the most destructive path of all, child abuse and neglect.
This quote, this describes the last days of Nick's Mary Brown, a 7-year-old girl from Brooklyn. It's just a gut-wrenching reminder that for some kids, home is the most dangerous place they could possibly be. Her case ripped the cover off the brutal reality of what happens when a family becomes a torture chamber.
Now, this chart reveals a pretty surprising truth about maltreatment. While we hear a lot about physical and sexual abuse, and they are absolutely horrific, they are dwarfed by cases of neglect. A staggering 3/4 of all proven cases involve parents simply failing to provide the basics, like food, shelter, healthcare, or even just love. And the consequences, well, they're devastating, and they last a lifetime. Abuse and neglect can literally change the physical structure of a child's brain. They create these deep psychological wounds, a shattered sense of self, a profound mistrust of everyone, and a learned tendency to solve problems with aggression. It's a direct pipeline to future violence. So when a family fails this catastrophically, what's society's response supposed to be? how does the state actually step in to protect a child who's in danger? Well, the process is pretty complicated, but it generally follows these main steps. It all kicks off with a report to Child Protective Services. That triggers an investigation, and if the danger's real, the child might be removed from the home right then and there. From that point, the whole thing enters the legal system, moving from hearings to a possible trial. And the final step is called the disposition, where a judge makes the call on a long-term plan for that child's future.
And at the very heart of every single one of these cases is this incredibly difficult tightrope walk. The court has to weigh a parent's fundamental right to raise their own child against the state's absolute duty to protect that child from harm. And believe me, there are no easy answers here.
And the stakes are just unbelievably high for the most vulnerable among us. Get this number. 1 out of every 4 children who enter the foster care system hasn't even had their 5th birthday. We're talking about infants and toddlers, at the most critical stage of their development, being thrown into this fragmented and overwhelmed system.
So, all of this brings us to a final and absolutely critical question. We've seen the causes and the consequences of family breakdown, but what does it all mean for the cycle of violence in our society?
Let's just ask the question as plainly as we can. Does being abused or neglected as a kid make you more likely to become a juvenile offender?
The evidence is overwhelming, and the answer is a clear and resounding yes. Meal treatment literally doubles the chances of that child getting involved in future criminal behavior. Think about this. Up to 80% of kids in juvenile detention come from abusive homes. They are way more likely to be arrested as a juvenile and to commit a violent crime. The line from a broken home to a broken life is tragically, painfully clear.
And that just leaves us with one last, really challenging question to think about. We can clearly see the risk factors. We know the devastating cost of waiting until a child is already hurt. So why is our system so focused on reacting to tragedy instead of doing everything we can to prevent it from ever happening in the first place?